welcome to FCT's Online Sunday Service. We are so glad that you can join us this morning, and we would want to wish all of the mothers a blessed Mother's Day. So without further ado, let us just come and open with praise and worship to give God all the glory. Amen.
Your faithfulness, oh God. You wrestle with the sinner's heart. You lead us by still waters
As we celebrate Mother's Day today, we want to take this time to pray for them specifically, for all the mothers in our church and all those who are watching online. Let's pray. Father, we want to thank you this morning for all the mothers. We ask God for your hand upon them. We ask for the grace of God to be strong, to be upon them today. We ask, Lord, even especially during this movement control all this time, Father, we just pray they have been, Lord, taking care of the family members, they have been cooking. We ask, Lord, for your grace and your strength to come upon them, Lord. We ask, Lord, that you continue to bless them, Lord, all the spiritual blessing through Jesus Christ, Lord. We ask, God, you continue to bestow upon them your grace and your strength and your peace and your favor to come upon them, Lord, this day. We ask this in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Hi, good morning to all of you. It is so good to praise the Lord together online. And I want to say blessed and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. May God's richest blessings be with you always. It has been a tradition of FCT to celebrate both Mother's Day and the Women's Day together. So in honor of all the ladies, let us learn something from a lady today. My message today is entitled, Turn Around and Enter into God's Blessings. This morning, I want to talk about decision making and its consequences. We all make decisions all the time. There are big decisions, small decisions, good decisions, and bad decisions. But behold, there is always consequences behind every decision we make. And sometimes the consequences can be so serious, affecting our blessings from the Lord. What if we have made some decisions that is not good, and we are stuck in the consequence of that situation brought about by the bad decision? What should we do apart from suffering under the consequences of probably feeling regrets, fear, worries, and guilt and frustration? Is there no way out for those of us who have made wrong decisions in our lives? Let us now proceed to learn from this familiar biblical character, Naomi. From the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. There are two major characters there, but today we will focus on Naomi. The meaning of her name, Naomi, means lovable, the sweet and pleasant one, or my delight. It is a very good name for an Israelite lady. But contrary to her name, this is also one character in the Bible that suffered extreme affliction, misfortune, and destitute in her life. She endured so much pain and brokenheartedness that at one point of her life, she asked people to call her Mara instead of Naomi. And Mara means bitter. She thought her life was broken and bitter, and God has really dealt harshly with her and had abandoned her. But did God really abandon her, forsake her, and leave her in misery? To answer these questions, let us examine Naomi's journey of faith from the book of Ruth. Incidentally, the experiences of her life are closely linked to major decisions made in her life. We can divide this journey of faith into three sections. The first section is about life away from God's promised land. Naomi is introduced right from the beginning of the book. The first 5 verses of chapter 1 describe the phase of her life away from God's promised land. The first 2 verses tells us that the story of Naomi is set in the time of the period of Judges, where Israel had no king and the nation was ruled by the judges. This is a period when the Israelites already entered into the promised land, but they were distracted by the local pagan worship and they became unfaithful, disloyal, and disobedient to God. So even though they were living in the very promised land of God, their hearts were far away from the God who had delivered them from Egypt. In fact, Judges 21-25 tells us that everyone was doing just what they think is right in their own eyes, disregarding the instructions from God. Does this sound familiar to us today? We Christians who have been saved by the blood of Christ, we still want to live life according to our desires, our wishes. Well, now, there was a terrible famine in the land of Judah, the land promised and provided by God for His chosen people, the Israelites. A land is supposed to be flowing with milk and honey. How come there is famine in Judah? Though the causes of the famine is not mentioned in the Bible, but the Israelites themselves, they know it was the punishment from God because for their turning away from Him, worshipping the foreign pagan gods. And it was under such a circumstances that Naomi's husband, Elimelech, chose to take his family away from this promised land to other foreign lands. Is this a right decision? To modern readers, Elimelech was making a very practical move. In order to feed his family, he was just being pragmatic or logical. Well, let us look at the meaning of his name first. Elimelech means my God is king. So when Elimelech decided to leave Bethlehem of Judah, he has not only doubted the God of Israel, he has actually rejected his God as his king. Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, God has clearly laid out all the instructions for the Israelites to live in that promised land. And God's people are supposed to stay in the promised land and not among the heathens. Elimelech's decision to leave Bethlehem in search of other places of blessing instead is actually an act of unfaithfulness to God. Even though his intention was merely to go for a while until the famine is over. But do you know that Moab is a place notorious for its evil and false worship? And furthermore, the Moabites are enemies to the Israelites. And yet, Elimelech and Israelites chose Moab as his destination for food. Today, similarly for Christians, God has taught us how to live on this earth. Paul in Colossians 3:2 has advised Christians to always set our minds on things above and not on things on the earth. So, is it wise to forego God's principles and teaching when we are pursuing earthly treasures? Have we missed out something important here? Now, The subsequent verses 3 to 5 tells us about life in Moab. Initially, life was good because there was plenty of food, but all the joy was replaced by grief because of the untimely death of Elimelech. This must have come as a shock and grief for Naomi. After that, life became even tougher for Naomi as she has to struggle to raise her two sons in the foreign land. However, when her two sons eventually grew up, both of them ended up marrying local Moabite women. This is a violation to God's law, and Naomi must have felt guilty before God. But it was she and her husband who brought the two sons to Moab, far away from their homeland, their own people. The two sons had no other choices. With this, Naomi and her two sons and her two daughters-in-law, they remained in Moab until another tragedy struck. Unfortunately, both her sons died young, leaving the whole households with 3 poor widows. For Naomi, losing first her husband, then her two sons, it was just too traumatic for her. Her heart was completely broken, and her hopes were all shattered. And the livelihood of the 3 widows were even a more serious problem later, because there was no more man in the family to protect and to provide for them. Naomi must have been asking, why all this misfortune happened to me? But being an Israelite who knew God from young, she knew that she and her husband had disobeyed God when they left Bethlehem during the time of the famine. They should have remained in Bethlehem, repented, and wait for God to heal the land. And the two sons had even further disobeyed God by being unequally yoked with the local Moabite women. She knew in her heart that all the suffering was the consequences of disobeying God's will. She made 2 major wrong decisions. The journey away from home, from Bethlehem, in search of food, had actually taken them out of the protection and the blessings of God. There must be a lot of regrets and bitterness. Well, in spite of all this, has God forgotten his daughter? Now we move on to the next part of her life from verses 6 to 22 of chapter 1. I call this phase response to God's calling. From the passage, we know that Naomi had developed very good and loving relationship with her 2 daughters-in-law. During their time together, she must have shared a lot of good testimonies about the true and living God of Israel, what he has done for the Israelites. But in the process, Naomi got homesick. She began to think about Bethlehem, her hometown. From verse 7, we are going to hear something different. Verse 7 tells us that one day she heard that the merciful God of Israel has blessed her homeland again with good crop, and there were plenty of food. This is an indication that God has healed the land in Judah. But this is a message, a call from God, from Bethlehem for Naomi. Upon hearing this piece of news, a strong desire arose from within. She desired to go back to Israel, to her own people. So she made another decision. She decided to return to Israel. But what about her two daughters-in-law? She persuaded them to return to their parents. But from verse 16, we know that one of the daughters-in-law, Ruth, insisted on following Naomi because she wanted Naomi's God, the God of Israel, to be her God. So wonderful. With this, both Ruth and Naomi, they journeyed their way back to Israel. When they arrived at Bethlehem, it was in the season of harvesting. When Naomi's friends saw her from afar, they asked, "Is that Naomi?" Naomi has left home for 10 years. And she must have looked very different with all the sorrow she has experienced in her life. This is how Naomi answered her friend. Verse 20. "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for God has dealt bitterly with me." And she continued, "I went away full when the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and brought calamity upon me?" Have you noticed that? Naomi had acknowledged that it was the Lord who brought her back. Let us pause and think for a while. Did Naomi really return empty as she claimed? It is true that she has lost her husband, her two sons whom she was with when they left Bethlehem. But look carefully. Is it true that she went out full and came back empty? Sometimes when we are bitter, we can be blinded by self-pity, by issues. Naomi didn't come back empty. She came back with Ruth, a good daughter-in-law who followed her because of her testimony of a good and faithful God. She certainly didn't come back empty. So, in spite of walking out of God's will, God still provided and cared for Naomi. She gave her Ruth in place of her two sons. And God brought Naomi back when she responded to his call from Bethlehem. Actually, this is a good illustration how some of us can be so absorbed by our own perceptions of issues and missed out the working and the many blessings of God in our lives. Before we moved on to find out what happened to Bethlehem, I would like you to take note that until now, prior to all this, Naomi's story has been about pain, affliction, and suffering. But I'm telling you, from now on, we are going to see a very different picture. Coming back to Bethlehem is actually a turn around for Naomi. It means she has made another decision to come back to God's promised land, back into the protection and the provision and the blessings of God. Now we will move to the third part of her journey of faith. I call it the restoration of God's blessing. As the story continues, we can see God unfold many greater providence and blessings to Naomi. From the summary of chapter 2 and 3, we can see that Jehovah God is indeed a very good God. He cares and provides for his people especially the poor, through the Jewish law of gleaning, which refers to the picking up of grains from the field. The Jewish law, forbids harvesting to be done at the corners of the field, and whatever sheaf fallen on the ground had to be left behind so that the poor can come and glean. Ruth and Naomi survived because of this law. Ruth was able to glean enough grains for herself and Naomi when they returned to Bethlehem. Interestingly, under the guiding hands of God, amidst so many fields in Judah, Ruth was guided to glean from the field of a man called Boaz, and she found favor with Boaz. Later, Naomi arranged for Boaz, who is actually a close relative, to marry Ruth as a kinsman redeemer. God has used Boaz as the redeemer under this Jewish kinsman redeemer culture to help Naomi to claim back, to redeem all the land belonging to Naomi's husband, Elimelech, and her sons by marrying Ruth, the widow of her son. Let us quickly go over to chapter 4, and I would like you to read these few verses. Chapter 4, 14 to 16. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. Your daughter who loves you is more to you than 7 sons, and she has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. We know from the end of the book that Ruth had given birth to Obed, and Obed is the grandfather of the famous King David. This is the picture of blessings for Naomi. God was Naomi's redeemer. Even though Naomi has made wrong decisions and has been disobedient to God, God did not forsake her. Through Ruth, her daughter-in-law, who loved her so much, she was blessed ultimately. God has been guiding and providing for Naomi step by step. He gave her a good daughter-in-law and later a son for the family line. The emptiness which she claimed from return from Moab is now replaced by the declaration of the fullness of joy through the birth of baby Obed. By then, all her bitterness was gone, and she was happy and pleasant again. And all this were made possible because she turned around and decided to live right with God again. This story tells us that while God is righteous in his judgment, he is even more so full of loving kindness and mercy. He's always waiting for his people to return to him, and he wants to be their God, and he wants to guide them into the full blessing that he has prepared for them. Let us learn from Naomi's lesson. Slides, please. She knew God, yet she walked in disobedience and suffered. But when God called her again, she responded and turned around to return to God. And ultimately, she entered into God's blessings. We might not have Naomi's traumatic experience, but we might have made wrong decisions and walked in disobedience, and we are probably struggling in regrets and pain of the consequences. I believe today's message is a call from God to all of us. This is the time for us to turn around and go back to God, walk in God's way, and enter into His blessings. If we have been troubled by issues of the past decision, if we have not been living our lives according to God's teaching, it is time for us to come before God and ask God to guide us back to His way. We want to live our lives according to God's way, God's will, because we know God's blessings await us. In this time of pandemic, when there is so much fear and uncertainties regarding the future, as Christians, we know this is the sign of the return of the Lord being very near. With this knowledge, all the more we should be prepared to face the Lord. For all too long, we have been living life our way. If we have not been loving God and serving God the way we should, it is time we allow God to change our hearts. Remember, whatever situation we are in, God will not forsake us, and He will certainly redeem us and restore us, because He will not leave us today without a Redeemer. God is our Redeemer. He will definitely deliver us. Surely, all things work together for good to those who love God and called according to His purpose. I would like to close with a prayer. Dear God, I thank You for this message to ask us to turn back to You. It is indeed a timely message. I pray that there is an awakening within our hearts to know that God, You love us so much and You want to bless us so much. For those of us who have been struggling with issues on our own strength, help us to surrender all these issues to You. God, You guide us on. Help us to love You with all our heart, with all our soul, our mind, and our strength. And we obey Your commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves. Forgive all our weaknesses and our disobedience. Help us to live according to Your will, so that we all will walk into the blessings that You have prepared for us. Thank You, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.